Not a single person pointed out that Katy Perry did not write the song Call Me Maybe.
Do you think nobody wanted to admit that they know female pop stars? The biggest insult of all is not to be insulted, it's to be ignored.
It was published because it was content marketing, and that's why we argued with the PR folks that we should publish this. It doesn't age that well because Docker moves so quickly.
Like a ship.
Hi, I'm Paul Bigger, founder of Circle CI.
I'm Edith Harba, CEO and co-founder at LaunchDarkly.
And you're listening to Be Continuous, a podcast about continuous delivery and software development.
You can get in touch with us anytime at our Twitter handle @ContinuousCast.
The show is brought to you by HeavyBit. To learn more, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.
Paul, so you had an article that literally when you published it, I looked up and Oren, who sits next to me at HeavyBit, and Max, who sits next to me, were literally laughing out loud and quoting different lines. This was an article called The Future, and I have to say it was extremely funny. And it was one of the reasons why we started doing the podcast, because I was like, this guy is really funny. We should start having a conversation. So I'd love to hear more about why you wrote that article and the reaction to it.
Yeah, cool. So I guess I feel we should do many more episodes that involve a lot of compliments and flattery at the start of the episode. It's a pretty good way to start an episode.
Well, anytime you wear the LaunchDarkly t-shirt, you just always look good.
The article was called "It's the Future," and it was basically a kind of a send up of the Docker ecosystem at the time, and it doesn't age that well because Docker moves so quickly,
like a ship.
Basically, the premise of it was that there's a lot of complexity in the Docker ecosystem, and it was sort of a screenplay between two characters, one of whom was asking, I'm trying to launch an app, how do I do this? And the other who was a complete Docker and container and It's the Future fanboy, and it went back and forth of each time they would ask something, there'd be a new rabbit hole to go down. And actually, the image that went with it was a rabbit looking down a rabbit hole. And yeah, it was very, very well received. It was funny though that when I first wrote it, and I showed it to a couple of people at Circle, and they didn't know that I had written it. They thought it was just like a thing I was sending around.
That was clever. So you were A/B testing it?
No, not deliberately. I just had been ambiguous with how I was phrasing it. And
so did you deliberately leave your name off so that they weren't tainted, or was it just accidental?
No, they just didn't look closely enough. I posted it in like cut and paste into a Slack paste bin sort of thing. And so my name was none. It was just they thought it was like a paste bin meme that was going around or something like that. But I had showed it to our PR people, and the PR people said, under no circumstances can you publish this.
Because
there's others in the ecosystem that were mentioned, potential partners and actual partners and that sort of thing. So they said you can't publish this. And then when everyone in the office was saying oh my God, you have to publish this. So I sat down again with PR and negotiated its release.
Was this an external firm or your internal PR?
This was internal PR. So there's our regular PR person, and there's someone who was providing sort of external PR services at the time, and then our social media person, and we were sort of there was the three of them sitting on one side of the table while I'm trying to negotiate the terms of release.
Well, so they must have felt strongly, because they'll say usually people don't want to disagree with the CEO or founder.
So I mean, definitely in the first draft, there was...
is there a legendary first draft?
I have a first draft somewhere, but basically some names were changed to protect...
the guilty.
To protect people who are our partners or who we wanted to be our partners or something like that.
Which in Silicon Valley is basically everybody.
Right, exactly. So I mean, you can't really tell from the situation, but I think the people who got kind of there was a lot of someone is dead.
Yeah.
Right. In the article, it's something is dead. You need to use Docker now, or you need to use CoreOS, or you need to use one of the new shiny things. Right. Virtualization was one of the things that was dead, and maybe owning bare metal was dead or something like that. So those companies that were involved in that were first named, and then we had to pick other companies who were not going to be our partners, but who were vaguely in that space. And it's funny because one of the founders of another Docker company had emailed me afterwards. So I wrote that post called "It's the Future," and then I wrote a follow-up post called "It Really Is the Future," where I said, the last post was just a joke. We actually think this is how technology is going. And I mentioned 12 companies that were in the Docker space, whereas before I'd only mentioned 6 of them. And someone wrote to me and said, "Thanks so much for mentioning me. We felt kind of left out in your previous article that you didn't make fun of us."
Yeah, I mean, the biggest insult of all is not to be insulted, it's to be ignored.
Right, yeah. So we ignored some companies deliberately who actually wouldn't care. Big companies, or at least much bigger than us, and so the being ignored would not be a massive insult to them, and replaced it with, I think Vagrant was one of the victims, and Heroku was one of the major ones that was Heroku's dead. You need to do something else, and of course the punchline is, well, if you haven't read the article, read the article.
Yeah,
but the punchline was at the end. It's going back to, Heroku is the simple way to deploy all this instead of having basically a distributed systems degree to be able to launch a web app.
Well, that's why I think so. Oren and Max, who sit next to me, had both come out of Heroku.
Of course, yeah.
They thought it was absolutely hilarious.
Well, I sent the article to some people I know at Heroku, and a couple of minutes later, the Heroku Twitter account retweeted this.
Yeah. Was that your intended distribution strategy, or?
Yeah, the way I distributed the article was I emailed everyone I knew in the industry and said you might enjoy this.
So basically, you're saying you're a social media master.
Social media master, and then there was the Hacker News, and released it at the right time in Hacker News. I think you're supposed to release it at 10 a.m. on a Thursday or something like that, but it wasn't. There was 20 minutes after I published it on Hacker News where it had 1 or 2 upvotes.
Uh-oh.
And then all of a sudden, I guess, after people had read the thing, because it was a long thing, and all of a sudden it went quite viral.
Supernova.
Yeah.
So how did you come up with the idea to write it?
It's hard to know how you something spun into your head, but there's how I thought I wrote it, and then based on the feedback that I got, I realized that there was another vector. So it just popped into my head one day. There was I said in my head something stupid about how Docker was annoying or something like that, and then it just evolved into a he said she said sort of situation. I read afterwards. Someone tweeted at me to say, "Oh, that reads a lot like something I wrote on the Joel on Software forums 10 years ago," and I went back and read it, and I had read this 5 times before.
Yeah.
And so it was, this will probably ring a lot of bells about the Hammer Factory abstract protocol method or whatever. A guy goes into a hardware store to buy a hammer, and the shopkeeper says, "Oh, we don't sell hammers anymore. We only sell hammer factories." It's all right, I'll have one of those. And it's well, actually, we don't sell hammer factories. Now we only sell hammer factories. And it's oh, well, okay, give me one of those. And it's well, actually, people want it more than hammers. So, we have a tool factory. And it goes on.
It's kind of like the Austin Powers joke where, he says he has a factory that makes tiny factories.
Right, exactly. It was factories of factories of factories, and it went on for a long time, and it was very deep. And it's almost exactly. I mean, it's not the same joke, but it's the same layout, and it's the same setup. So I think that was probably a large influence. I didn't realize it until he mentioned it to me.
Well, I mean, it's a funny pattern, which I think people have been doing. There's always a straight man.
Yeah, exactly.
And the question I've been trying to figure out for a while is, am I the straight man or are you?
Right. I don't know if you've seen Who's On First.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So someone else said, this is basically Who's On First. And I went to look at Who's On First. I'd never seen it before.
You never seen it?
I didn't grow up in America.
Oh, I thought you grew up in New York.
I lived there for a couple of years as a teenager, but not really. So yeah, I watched Who's On First, and Who's On First is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. It's amazing.
Yeah, and people only know the first part, but it just gets funnier the deeper you go into it.
Right, it's 7 minutes long or something.
Yeah, well, because the jokes just pile up on each other.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I liked about the article is that you name checked so many things, they were right there.
Right. I was talking to some large company, which I'll remain nameless, who wanted to be our partner afterwards, and they want to be our partner entirely because of the article.
Oh.
The article had been sent around in an internal list, and people thought it was hilarious. But when we went to talk to them, and I was chatting to one of the senior guys there, and he was saying that there was so much technical detail in it that it actually looked like we knew what we were talking about, and it wasn't just a joke. And that was kind of the point. It was supposed to be that there is a lot of technical detail in here, and I think certainly at the time it was very accurate for what the ecosystem was like.
Yeah, I mean, part of why it was funny was it wasn't just a word salad of plain, like
Right.
anybody can look at Crunchbase and be like, here's 17 names and combine them.
Yeah. And so a number of people sent me their versions of that. So they wrote a version for something else. And so one guy wrote it for front-end technologies. And it was super clear that he knew what he was talking about. And the joke really, really held up and it worked well.
Yeah, well, we have a similar, it's a cartoon, but so there's somebody who's trying to ask somebody else how it worked. And they're like, well, you know, we have a Firebase backend that then commit.
Right, yes, yeah.
And then the punchline is, so you just tell me to fuck myself.
Right. I know the one.
Like, because once our designer was asking how we collected emails on our website, and we're like, well.
So someone else sent me an article that it wasn't as bad as a collection of random words, but it didn't make as much sense for the joke. So I think that one didn't get published.
Yeah, so did you set out for it to be, you know, a widely circulated piece that would get you partnerships, or is it just scratching an itch, or a combination?
I mean, it was very intentionally, you know, a content marketing piece.
Oh.
So I mean, it wasn't like I sat down to write, you know, content marketing, but it was this is funny. We should publish this on our blog. And obviously the point of the blog is that people come to the site and that they get retargeted and all this sort of thing, and that they eventually buy our product. Even, you know, through direct mechanisms of, you know, clicking over to the site. And I think at the bottom of the piece we had a call to action. Do you want to use Docker and continuously deliver that shit? Which was one of the quotes from the piece. And so yeah, I mean, it was published because it was content marketing, and that's why we argued with the PR folks that, you know, we should publish this.
So how many drafts did you go through? I mean, so some of the jokes are really funny. Did you
Well,
have
so
people...
by the time I published it, nothing was funny.
Oh.
Like it was, I can read it now. I can't see a single joke in there.
Oh, well,
it's
there's the one about like BSD, and you're like, it's San Francisco.
Right, BDSM.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So I recognize that they are funny in a purely academic sense.
Oh.
But I can't laugh at anything because I've read that thing like 100 times, and nothing survives. Nothing is funny after you've read it 100 times. But the first time and the second time, the third time I read it, I could sort of see it that it was funny, and it went through maybe 10 or 12 drafts.
Wow.
So there's a couple of drafts at the start, and then there was the draft to remove the partners' names and be rewritten with other people's names in its place. And then there was a couple more drafts. There was a draft to make it ambiguous as to the gender of both participants.
Oh, that's very clever.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that until now.
Yeah, so there is one place where the what's the opposite of the straight man in the
comedian, the yuckster.
The straw man or whatever.
Oh, the straw man.
That's probably not the name, but the person who the joke is on.
That's the straight man.
Oh, that's okay, right.
So the straight man is the one who's just like, oh, who's on first?
Okay, I can see that. So that person said, "Oh, I'm more of a distributed system guy now," and that was the only kind of gendered reference in the whole thing. And obviously there's a big thing at the moment of, you know, trying to make sure that everything is not just, you know, put out from the male perspective, or, you know, the assumption that everyone in the tech industry is male. So we deliberately removed all kind of gendered references and rewrote some of the jokes or things to make it ambiguous as to who is what, or whether there was even any genders involved at all.
That's fascinating. So like, the reason why I asked is I saw the producers of Airplane speak, and they say that they had tested every single gag in that movie on studio audiences. So I pictured you like putting out draft after draft and like sharpening each line.
So there was a little bit of sharpening, but for the most part, it went out as it was.
So it was more like dulling as you're taking out the pointed.
No. So actually, when we changed the companies that were involved, it got funnier.
Oh.
So we had the opportunity to kind of refine the joke and to make it a bit more appropriate for the companies that got mentioned. Some of them had been a little bit of a reach before because they were, in my head, I was thinking of the people who were our partners at the time, and that it had been a bit of a stretch to make the specific joke I did. And then when we had to remove them, we I could search around a little bit and find the ideal company that could be poked in just the right way.
So the article was a lot of planning. It was a content marketing piece.
Well, it was a thing I wrote in about an hour that we then planned how do we market this to get the most effective outreach and that kind of thing.
So what was the reaction? What was the thing that surprised you most? Or
I guess the thing that surprised me most was that a lot of people's reactions were, oh yeah, fuck that Docker shit. So most people who read it perceived that we meant it. And that Docker was complete crap.
Interesting, because I think it was clear that it was very tongue-in-cheek.
And in fact, when we launched it, we had a tongue-in-cheek disclaimer at the top, which we've since removed because it wasn't really necessary. But there was a lot of people complaining when we wrote "It really is the future." Nobody hated "It's the future." A lot of people hated "It really is the future."
Interesting.
So the idea that you're going out and taking the piss out of this new company, this new technology, yeah, people love that. But you go back and say, actually, we really do think it's good. People hate that.
Oh no.
Yeah. So the haters really hated on the second one.
But the second one I thought was very innocuous. The second one was just kind of a rah Docker is good piece. It wasn't. There wasn't a dialogue. It wasn't funny.
It wasn't that funny, no. But there was a discussion of why do people hate new stuff.
Oh, I like that line.
Yeah, the kind of people who would look at the Sistine Chapel and say,
"Why do we need to paint the ceiling?"
Yeah, like I have a fresco in my house already, or something along those lines. And obviously, no one likes the idea, or no one likes being dismissed as mere curmudgeons.
It's funny. So I wrote a kind of controversial article called "Kill the Staging Server."
Right.
And I actually have a follow-up planned, which is the staging server is dead.
Long live the staging server?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But I already got I got a lot of really good feedback. But the one tweet that made me a little bit sad was this person who just had a link is like, "Call me when you start doing serious software development."
Yeah. I mean,
okay, you don't have any rebuttal or rebuke or feedback. You're just like, and by the way, shouldn't software development be fun?
Right. Paul Graham has this article that he wrote years ago, the 6 levels of how to disagree with somebody, and the main one is refute the main point of the argument, and the earliest one is sort of or the simplest and least effective or least convincing one is dismiss it out of hand.
Yeah.
Or insult the person who says it for who they are or something along those lines. So it's very easy to ignore those. I don't even notice that hate anymore. The feedback that I found really interesting was the people who were mentioned in the articles who were kind of making jokes at each other about the article. And especially, so there's a couple of things I got wrong, but that people perceived them as part of the joke. So one of the things I talked about is this guy, Diego, who in the article, he worked for CoreOS and he wrote etcd.
Yep.
In fact, he did neither of those things. I had met him when he was interning at CoreOS or something like that, but he didn't actually take a job there. So Alex Pulvey, tweeted at him. It's like, "Oh, I hear you work now, or I hear you work for us now. I expect you to be, here on Monday morning." But the thing is, I didn't know that, and so people thought it was just all part of the joke. And so people corrected every single minor detail that they thought was part of the joke. They're like, "Oh, I love how you made this joke here about how Diego works at CoreOS." And there's various things like that. But not a single person pointed out that Katy Perry did not write the song "Call Me Maybe."
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was intentional.
That's Carly.
Exactly, yeah.
I'll own that one.
It was that was. I think I got that wrong in the first draft, but after that I left it in deliberately because
Do you think nobody wanted to admit that they know female pop stars?
I don't think anyone knew.
Oh.
I think that people are "Call Me Maybe," Katy Perry. That sounds right.
No.
But 100,000 views, no one pointed that out.
Maybe they either didn't know or embarrassed to admit they knew.
Maybe, yeah. But every little tiny bit of something else that was ever so slightly off.
What else?
There was another one, but I don't remember what it was. But it was kind of along those lines as well. So I didn't know that he didn't work there, and I didn't know that he didn't write etcd. I think he did design Raft. I'm pretty sure that he designed Raft, which is the protocol in etcd. I don't remember the other thing.
Well, so you said you already felt that the article was a little dated. Like, so how do you feel like things have moved on since then?
Well, so the whole Docker thing moves really, really fast. And so there's probably a couple of like companies or technologies that were mentioned in there that have changed their name or been acquired or gone out of business or, something along those lines. There was also, I remember when I wrote it, there was a bit of a war going on between CoreOS and Docker, which they've since buried the hatchet and become friends. But there's probably a couple of technologies there that have changed. CoreOS released the Tectonic stack sometime after that, I'm pretty sure. And so that, would probably get a little name dropped a little bit or, differently or something like that. And I imagine that, maybe, Docker has had several releases of Swarm at this point. And maybe, that might have gotten a bigger thing. But like the things that were big at the time were the things I mentioned. And those are not necessarily the things that are big now, just because of how early Docker is and how quickly that technology is moving.
Yeah. So, this is a friendly podcast, but what do you think of Docker now?
I mean, I think Docker is awesome.
Yeah.
It solves a real problem that people needed solved. And, the complexity that results from that is real. It's getting managed and it's getting managed better over time. But it's real because you're writing distributed systems. Distributed systems are hard. No silver bullet technology is going to make distributed systems easy. It can just make them more manageable. And Docker, certainly very useful as part of making distributed systems more manageable, but there's still a distributed system. Abstractions leak and abstractions will continue to leak, and you still need to understand a whole set of new technologies.
Wow. So you're going to write the future in a year or so, or do you think?
I tweeted about this recently. I think that's the best thing I've ever written. And I think I probably can't do it justice again. And I remember looking at the Google Analytics for this article. And so the follow-up article was bigger than the biggest thing I'd written before. And then the first article was like 5 times bigger than that or 10 times bigger than that.
Wow.
Like first day, 100,000 views.
Wow.
So like you can't really follow that up. And I spent a couple of days thinking about like, okay, what am I going to write next? What am I going to follow this wave with? But like, I quickly realized, you can't be chasing that dragon. The likes and social media and content marketing dragon is like, I mean, it's kind of like the problem that people have with Facebook. When you're constantly, or maybe with Instagram, that when you're constantly looking for like people to like your thing and you're looking for affirmation from social mechanisms instead of just what you're working on, everything's negative from that point.
Yeah, that's interesting because you're not that active on Twitter.
Right, exactly. And part of that is just accepting that I'm not really that good at Twitter. I mean, I occasionally say some stuff that's interesting or funny, but I'm very happy to not be chasing likes or affirmations or retweets or whatever the thing is.
Yeah, they're very seductive. I know
Right.
I do content marketing too. I write articles.
Of course, yeah.
And I wrote first one about fundraising. Mm-hmm. I compared fundraising to an enterprise sale.
Okay.
You have your champion, you have a process. It got a decent amount of traffic. I thought it would get a lot more, but then I wrote something which I considered kind of geeky and technical, which was why people were doing continuous delivery. Much more popular than the fundraising article I was covering.
Okay.
And then my last one, which was on staging servers, which I thought was intensely narrow of an audience, got the most traffic of any of them.
Okay.
And it actually got comments. It got, it got shares, it got comments, and I was like, whoa. I think it just proved that something I thought only really I cared about actually had this chord.
Well, I mean, it tends to always be that way, that there's something that you don't expect to be as big as it is. I remember someone telling me that, what is the name of that company? There was like a Google Docs competitor that got acquired by Yahoo at some point.
Tumblr?
No, a Google Docs competitor. Anyway, the biggest piece of content that they ever wrote was something about Ajax. And it was written like in the early days of Ajax and all the JavaScript-y stuff. But like it wasn't a company that made JavaScript tools, or it wasn't a developer tools company, but that was like the biggest thing that they had ever written, and the thing that led to the most inbound traffic. And I mean, if you're judging things by the business metrics that you're trying to generate, you have to be looking at leads or signups or money in the bank at the end of the day, rather than whether someone retweets your stuff or whether there's a like there. And you have to be looking at the business metrics, not the social metrics, and not the things that make you feel good.
Well, I mean, they go hand in hand.
Often they go hand in hand, and I think often they don't.
This is going to go all philosophical, but
Well, I mean, so for example, a lot of the things that had the biggest retweets and that sort of thing were fundraising announcements. But people don't follow fundraising announcements to buy your product, at least not at the rate. As content marketing goes, a fundraising announcement isn't all that good. A viral blog post, much better.
yeah. I'm happy that we got to talk about this. Is there anything bad that came out of this article?
I don't think so, really. I don't think that there was any negativity from any of the people involved. There was a couple of haters on Twitter, but there's always haters on Twitter. Always, there's a couple of haters on Hacker News, but that's what Hacker News is now, unfortunately. But yeah, definitely, I'm glad I wrote it, and I'm glad I followed it through, and I think that I think it will be hard to ever top that one. Thanks for listening to this episode of To Be Continuous, brought to you by HeavyBit and hosted by me, Paul Bigger of Circle CI, and Edith Harbaugh of Launch Darkly.
To learn more about HeavyBit, visit heavybit.com. While you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.